Epictetus's Discourses, 111, on family affection. Epictetus once received a visit from a government official, and after questioning him about various specific points, he asked him whether he had a wife and children. And when the man replied that he had, he went on to ask, "How do you find family life then?" "Miserable," the man replied. "How so? For it's surely not for this that people marry and have children, to be miserable, but rather in the hope of being happy." "Well, for my part," the man said, "my little children are such a source of distress to me that not long ago, when my little daughter was ill, I couldn't even bear to be in the room with her during her illness, but fled and stayed away until someone told me that she was well again." "Well, then," replied Epictetus, "do you then think that you were right to have acted that way?" "I was behaving naturally," he said. "But that is the very thing that you must convince me of," replied Epictetus, "that you are behaving in accordance with nature, and I will then convince you that whatever is done in accordance with nature is rightly done." "That's how all fathers feel," said the man, "or at least most do." "I don't dispute that," said Epictetus, "but the point at issue between us is whether it's right to feel like that. For in that case, one would have to say that tumors develop for the good of all the body just because they do in fact develop. And in a word, that to fall into error is natural just because almost all of us, or at least most of us, do fall into error. What you must show me then is how your behavior is in accordance with nature." "I can't," the man replied, "but rather you should show me how it isn't in accordance with nature and how it isn't right." "Well, suppose we were inquiring about black and white. What criterion would we call upon to distinguish between them?" Epictetus asked. "Sight," the man replied. "And if it were a matter of hot and cold, or hard and soft, what would be the criterion?" Epictetus asked. "Touch." "Well, then, since our present debate is about whether things are in accordance with nature and rightly done, or the opposite, what criterion would you have us take?" "I don't know," he said. "When it comes to colors and smells, to be sure, and flavors too, to have no knowledge of the criterion will perhaps cause no great harm. But when it comes to the nature of good and evil, and whether or not our actions are in accordance with nature, do you suppose that someone suffers no great harm if he has no knowledge of that?" "On the contrary," the man replied, "the greatest harm." Epictetus said, "Come now, tell me, is everything that is thought by certain people to be good and fitting rightly thought to be so? Is it possible, for instance, that all the opinions that the Jews, Syrians, Egyptians, and Romans currently hold with regard to food are rightly held?" "How is that possible?" the man asked. "And I imagine, on the contrary, that if the opinions of the Egyptians are right, it must necessarily follow that the opinions of the others aren't right. Or if those of the Jews are right, those of the others aren't." "Without a doubt," the man replied. "Now, where there is ignorance, there is lack of knowledge and instruction with regard to essential matters." This the man agreed to. "Now that you recognize this," continued Epictetus, "you will have no greater concern henceforth, and set your mind on nothing else, than to come to know the criterion by which one can judge whether things are in accordance with nature, and then to apply that knowledge in judging each particular case. But for the moment, this is all the assistance that I can give you in helping you to achieve your desire. Does love of one's family strike you as being natural and good?" "How could it not be?" the man replied. "Well, then, love of one's family is natural and good, and isn't what is also reasonable good?" "Without a doubt," he said. "So there is thus no conflict between love of one's family and what is reasonable?" "I think not. Otherwise, it would follow that if one of the conflicting things was in accordance with nature, the other would be contrary to nature." "Isn't that so?" Epictetus asked. "Absolutely," he replied. "So it follows that wherever we find family affection accompanied by reason, we can confidently declare it to be right and good?" "Yes, indeed," the man replied. "Well, then," said Epictetus, "I imagine that you won't deny that to abandon a child when it is ill and go off is an unreasonable thing to do. It remains for us to consider whether that is consistent with love of one's family." The man replied, "Let's consider the matter then." Since you had such affection for your child, then, was it right for you to rush off and leave it? And its mother? Has she no affection for the child? Oh, of course she does. Should its mother too have abandoned it then or not? She shouldn't have. And its nurse, does she love it? She does, he said. Should she too have left it? In no way. And its attendant, does he love it? He does. What about him? Should he have left it and gone off so that the child would have been left on its own without help as a result of the great affection in which it was held by you, its parents, and all who had charge of her, and would quite possibly have died in the hands of people who had no love or care for her? Heaven forbid. And in truth, wouldn't it be unfair and unreasonable that actions that one considers proper for oneself, because one feels such affection, should not also be permitted to others who feel no less affection? It would be absurd, the man said. Tell me now, if it had been you who were ill, would you have wanted all of your relations, down even to your children and wife, to prove their affection by leaving you all on your own and deserted? In no way I would like that. Epictetus went on, would you wish to be loved by those around you to such a degree that, because of their all too great affection, you would always be left on your own when ill? Or rather, he continued, for that very reason, wouldn't you have wished to be loved by your enemies instead, if that were possible, so that it would be they who left you alone? If so, it can only be concluded that your actions were in no way prompted by affection. Well, then, Epictetus continued, was it nothing at all that stirred and impelled you to abandon your child? How could that be possible? No, it was a motive like the one that impelled a man at Rome to cover his face when the horse that he backed was running, so that when the horse did in fact win against all expectation, they had to apply sponges to revive him from his faint. What motive is that then? This is perhaps not the right moment for a precise explanation, but it is enough for us to be convinced that, if what the philosophers say is correct, we shouldn't look for the motive anywhere outside ourselves, but rather accept that it is one and the same cause that moves us in every case to do something or not do it, or to say something or not say it, or to avoid something or pursue it. And the very same cause, in fact, that has motivated my present action too and your own, yours to have come to me and to be sitting here to listen, and mine to be speaking as I am. And what causes that? Epictetus asked. Is it anything other than this, that we thought fit to do so? Nothing other, said the man. And if we had thought fit to act otherwise, what else would we have been doing than that which seemed good to us? Isn't it true, Epictetus went on, that in the case of Achilles, too, it wasn't the death of Patroclus that was the cause of his grief? For not everyone reacts in that way to the death of a comrade, but rather that he thought fit to grieve. And in your case the other day, when you ran off from your child, the reason was that you thought fit to do so. And if, on the contrary, you were to stay, that too would be because you thought it was right. And now you're going off to Rome because you think fit to do so. And if you were to decide otherwise, you wouldn't go. In a word, it is neither death, nor exile, nor distress, nor anything else of that kind that causes us to do something or not to do it, but rather our judgments and opinions. Have I convinced you of that or not? He asked the man. The man replied, you've convinced me. So in each case, as the causes are, so also are the effects. From this day forth, then, whenever we fail to act rightly, we'll ascribe the blame to nothing other than the judgments that led us to act as we did, and will endeavor to destroy it and cut it out, even more than with the tumors and abscesses of our body. In like fashion, we will also ascribe what we do rightly to the same cause, and no longer will we blame slave or neighbor or wife or children as being responsible for any of our ills, since we're now convinced that unless we judge things to be of a certain nature, we don't carry out the actions that follow from that judgment. Now, when it comes to forming a judgment or not forming one, we're the masters of that and not things outside ourselves. Quite so, the man agreed. So accordingly, from this day onward, We'll investigate and examine the nature and condition of nothing else at all, be it land or slaves or horses or dogs, but only of our judgments. That's my wish, the man said. You can see then, Epictetus continued, that it is necessary for you to become a student, that creature who is the butt of everyone's laughter, if you really want to subject your opinions to proper examination. And that, as you are fully aware, is not the work of a single hour or day.